It feels really weird standing in front of the camera without a script to read. Frankie Huang asks, who are some actors you'd love to work with? What movie do you wish you could remake? What dish do you cook if you want to show off at a potluck? So actors, this is the sort of thing that I could list 100 and then tomorrow I'll be like, oh crap, I missed these other 100. But the first couple that come to mind, Guy Pearce. Guy Pearce is consistently one of my favorite living actors. I think he's great, I want to work with him. Anne Hathaway, I'd love to work with Anne Hathaway. Eva Green, of course, longtime viewers know that she's one of my favorites. I'm like immediately blanking. Sam Neill, Chiwetel Ejiofor, been a big fan of his ever since Serenity. Sigourney Weaver, Salma Hayek, Keith David, Taraji P. Henson. I've actually been following her since her Smokin' Aces days. Oddly enough, the entire cast of Prometheus, Charlize Theron, Noomi Rapace, Idris Elba, Guy Pearce of course, Logan Marshall Green, Michael Fassbender, Rafe Spall, Sean Harris, Benedict Wong, Kate Dickie, every single person who appeared in that film. Leah McKendrick, she's someone I crossed paths with on Instagram, and then I saw that she had written and co-starred in the movie MFA a couple years back, which was really great. What movie do I wish I could remake? Probably one of the bad Michael Crichtons. I'd probably go with Sphere. It's one of my favorite novels, and I was not impressed with the movie adaptation. No offense to all those involved. Massive pool of talent, would love to work with all of them. In fact, if I had to remake it, I'd probably do this thing where I rehired the exact same cast and crew. I just changed the script a whole bunch. What dish do you cook if you want to show off at a potluck? That would be Alton Brown's recipe for chocolate rum mousse. Sash asks, do you have a favorite movie soundtrack? That'd probably be a tie between the Last Samurai soundtrack and literally anything that Clint Mansell has done. What got you into film? So I always knew I wanted to be a writer, storyteller. Way back in like first grade, I would like rewrite my favorite children's books and like change the endings. But it wasn't until high school that I really thought film would be the most interesting medium through which to tell stories, as opposed to like novels or comic books or plays, which I had tried writing. But yeah, once I got to high school, there was a collection of films that are very near and dear to my heart that came out in like 05 and 06. A whole bunch of them. Lord of War, Kingdom of Heaven, The Departed, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, Collateral, that was 04, Closer. I'm blanking, but in post-production I'll probably put a bunch of their posters right here. It was that crop of films that made me figure out the emotional, healing, cathartic potential of film, and I've always wanted to be involved ever since. What's your opinion on the Oscars? So the Oscars, the value of the Oscars as I see them is it's the one movie-themed party a year that you can throw without being called a dork. Otherwise, it's all just pageantry and politics. Disapproving Ray asks, what's your favorite Animorph book / story arc? The David trilogy is up there, but number one is always going to be the Hork-Bajir Chronicles, the Andalite Chronicles, and Visser. Like if I put an Animorph series into production, the goal would be to make it popular enough to justify plunking down $300 million on an adaptation of the Hork-Bajir Chronicles, Andalite Chronicles, and Visser. Spooky Zany asks, ever watched High School Musical? Cause I haven't, and if I did, opinion. Nope. Badger asks, question, you're so focused on film, what do you do to unwind? I'm in Wilton Manors, so I know Davie a little bit. What do you do locally? So I don't live in Davie anymore. I've been living in Chicago since, I came up here for college in 2008, and I've been living here permanently since 2012. So first of all, I really do like movies a lot. So sometimes in order to unwind, I'll watch a movie and not tweet about it. But if you want to talk non-movie related stuff, I like playing video games for like 45-minute intervals. And in case anyone wonders, some of my favorite video games right now are Subnautica, Spider-Man by Insomniac Games, and of course the Dark Souls series. William Balsam asks, can you tell us about the screenplays you turn into films if you had the money? You know, I had this policy for the longest time of not discussing my scripts, the scripts I've written on this channel, out of like some fear that they'd be stolen. But I don't know, at this point I'm like, who cares? The first script I ever finished that I was happy with the finished product is called Almost Gods. It's my homage to Dr. Strangelove. It has an identical structure, but a completely different setting. So it takes place in the 1500s Mexico during the conquest of the New World, or rather right after the conquest of the New World. And basically it's jumping back and forth between these three stories. There's a priest in Yucatan who has begun an inquisition, and he is simultaneously trying to infect the New World with smallpox. The other storyline is a ship that's making its way to port in Yucatan, and they're carrying smallpox-infected Bibles. And then the third story is this Mayan king who's meeting with his council of advisors to try and figure out how best to put a stop to this. And so it's like intercutting between all three of them, and at the end, all three locations are converging on each other, and I'm really proud of that one. The other script that I'm super happy about is called The Feral Child. This is the one that I entered into the Nickel Fellowship, and it placed in the top 15%. It's a story about this scientist in 1850s England who discovers a feral child living in the woods around his house, and he tells the world that he's going to rehabilitate the boy through scientific study. But it soon becomes clear after he gains custody of this kid that he is not interested in rehabilitation at all. He's interested in figuring out what humanity is. And in terms of tone and style, I always picture it being very much like The Prestige. Of course, I have a script with dinosaurs in it. It's called Birdland, that's B-Y-R-D. Land, which was originally conceived as a retelling of the Orpheus myth. So it's this guy who's got to like save his wife from this facility which is overrun with transgenic dinosaurs. It's basically, you know how at the end of Aliens when Ripley is like descending down into the nest and she's like prepping her guns and she's getting herself psyched up to go rescue Newt from the alien queen? It's like a feature-length version of the last act of Aliens. But to be perfectly honest, that one still needs some rewrites. I also have 2 outlines prepared for scripts that I want to do later this year, actually. The first story is about the world's most prolific reptile smuggler. I've done a lot of research on this one. The research has actually held me back from scripting. There's so much research to do and the research is so fun. But I describe that one as casino with snakes instead of slot machines. And the last script that I have outlined that I want to script for real later this year is, it doesn't have a title, but you know how it's inspired by Voyager 1, the satellite that was launched in the 70s. Voyager 1 included a golden phonograph attached to its side, which was like a welcome from planet Earth. It included all these recordings from planet Earth, all these sounds and music, and like instructions on how to find Earth. And my idea for this script is, what if Earth found another alien's version of the golden phonograph? So like alien satellite enters our solar system and we find it, and we're gonna follow it out into deep space and learn about the culture that launched it. I held off on scripting that one for a long time because the setup makes it seem so much like, say, Prometheus. But where it differs from Prometheus is that once they reach their destination, there's like a plot that happens. Johnny Coleman says, you've mentioned before that you have a lot of scripts and ideas for films that you do not have the means to pull off right now. What's the most interesting character that you've come up with, but that we haven't gotten to see? That would be the main character from Feral Child. He's probably the most three-dimensional character I think I've ever come up with. He does awful, terrible things, and he is therefore an awful, terrible person, but he is driven by these common desires that we all have. He just has more desire to see it through and less to lose. Anyway, that might be one that, like, I've thought about ways to get it on camera for $0. I've considered like some sort of podcast radio play version of it, but that would take forever to adapt. So then I was thinking about just like adapting the first 10 pages, because it's the best 10 pages I've ever written. Just like adapting the first 10 pages and like getting actors to read it on stage maybe. Anyway, hopefully you guys won't have to wait forever to see that one. Tanner Vogelgesang, I'm sorry, I'm gonna butcher the name. Tanner Vogelgesang says, what's a genre that you don't have a lot of experience with, but you'd like to become more well-versed in? Japanese. We spent a grand total of 1 week on Japanese cinema in film school. I always feel like my knowledge of Japanese cinema is woefully deficient. I mean, you've got Kurosawa and of course the entire Godzilla franchise, but I want to expand from that. Colette Magnuson asks, is there a film genre or subgenre that you have tried to like and just can't. Is there a genre that you love and consider a guilty pleasure? So try to love and just can't. I can't get into musicals. I do like a couple, Moulin Rouge, The Blues Brothers, but most musicals, they're just, I understand the appeal, but I don't know, adult human beings singing out their feelings, which could be communicated through like acting, I find more interesting. She also asks, is there a genre that you love and consider a guilty pleasure? So I have this beef with the phrase guilty pleasure. It's like you don't like your own tastes. But I guess I know the spirit in which the term is used, in which case I think my guilty pleasure is just like people go into space and terrible things happen to them, usually at the hands of a monster. And granted, that can be done really poorly, but that can be done really, really well. Luke asks, what films/filmmakers inspired you to pursue filmmaking yourself? Was there one film that sparked something in you and made you think, I want to do that? So I'd kind of touched on it earlier, the whole filmography of 2004, 5, and 6 was really when I got to a point where I realized movies weren't just entertainment, but they were actually important and valuable and useful for like sussing out things within me. But yeah, Lord of War, Serenity, Collateral, Closer, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, Kinky Boots, Mean Girls. Reese Gallagher asks, The Departed or Goodfellas? I think I've already answered this, The Departed. But you know what I like even more than The Departed? Just barely? Casino. I think that's Martin Scorsese's most underrated film. Christopher Walker asks, if you were to direct a period film, which era/decade would you most enjoy telling a story in? That's a good question. I don't feel like I'm an expert in any particular era, but I am interested in like American Western expansion. I think it'd be interesting to tell a story in the West, in the Old West, but actually tell it with an eye for historical accuracy, where it's not just like I think most Westerns are written like superhero films where like the rules of society just don't exist, and so your protagonists and antagonists can do whatever they want and just like roll into town and have this massive shootout. And those tropes can be put to good use, no doubt, but that's not actually what the Old West was like. From what I read, it actually wasn't particularly any more violent than it is today. So I think it'd be interesting to use that era, but not use it as an excuse to just propel every scene forward through unadulterated violence. Psych San says, you got all the money of the world to direct a movie adaptation of a book. The catch is you can't pick any book of the Animorphs franchise. Which book would you choose? So I was actually contemplating for a little while doing a video called Why is Michael Crichton So Hard to Adapt? And I was like, timeline. Great book. Terrible movie. Sphere, one of my favorite books of all time. Not a great film. The 13th Warrior, amazing book. Kind of a snooze though, once adapted to film. But then as I thought more about it, I was like, well, Andromeda Strain is great, and Jurassic Park is a masterpiece, and I love Congo for what it is. So it got me thinking that maybe Michael Crichton adaptations aren't actually the worst out there. I just remember the bad ones for being like, they're only notable in that they're adaptations of these Michael Crichton novels that turned into really mediocre movies. But anyway, that video was going to end with my pitch for an adaptation of Prey, which is what I think is Michael Crichton's best book that has never been filmed before. As far as I know, nobody's ever even tried. Tanner Vogel, oh man, I screwed up your name from your Patreon question. Now I'm about to screw it up on Twitter. Tanner Vogelgesang asks, do you ever find yourself emulating other creator styles in your works, whether it's your original films or your video essays? If so, how have you found and maintained your own style? Okay, so that's a pretty big question. I've only made one feature film so far, Second Service. I found myself watching just a lot of movies about private detectives down on their luck. I didn't want Second Service to be specifically film noir. I didn't want it to be like Humphrey Bogart. I wanted it to be more, a friend showed me the movie Broken City while I was like halfway through scripting that thing. And I think that sort of clarified my vision for the project. Not that I was trying to emulate that completely. I definitely wanted it to be its own thing with its own voice. But just the idea of like the down on his luck detective in the big city that isn't necessarily a strict noir. As for video essays, the first person that I found on YouTube where I just like became obsessed with like watching every one of their videos and then rewatching their videos was Acorn Films, which is still up. He was on hiatus for like 5 years from 2014 to just this past year, when all of a sudden he reappeared with a Patreon and a revamped channel, and he's putting out a ton of new content. But so he did video game reviews, and I think a lot of my early stuff was a very conscious attempt to emulate his style. And then of course, as time went on, I discovered other YouTubers, Lindsay Ellis, H-Bomber Guy, ContraPoints, and I feel every time I watch one of their videos, I feel like my style gets pulled in that direction, or at least my intent gets pulled in that direction. And yet I'm hoping that, I hope that the final result is something unique. So Reese Gallagher again, they say, I know it's annoying to ask a second question. No, it's not. But is there a movie/book that you don't like but believe gets too much hate? So that's an interesting question. You're not asking what's a film that I like that everybody else hates. You're asking if I don't like it, but I think it's hated on too much. Thor: The Dark World. Not a great film, but people talk about it like it's the worst. And it's not the worst, it's just they didn't come up with any lasting stakes. Like, that's its great sin. That's what makes it kind of forgettable. Casey Cobb asks, can I use this clip as a reaction in my day-to-day life? And I am a card-carrying messy bitch who lives for drama. Please do. I just would like to note that that I did not come up with the phrase, that it originated with Jonathan Van Ness in Game of Thrones, which in the end actually turned out to have a better run than the actual Game of Thrones. Rachel Solo asks, how do you rank recent Star Wars movies on your why you can't rank the Star Wars movies scale? So she's referring to a video that I made a couple years back where I said, I can't rank the Star Wars films because all of them do at least one thing better than all the others, which I still think is a good way to think about the franchise. It's actually, I think it's a useful way to think about any franchise with more than like 3 or 4 installments. But so basically, The Force Awakens I still think is probably the funniest Star Wars movie. It just makes, I don't know, I think the jokes aren't too corny, and it doesn't feel like it's trying too hard to make it funny. And then The Last Jedi is, I think when it came out, I think it's still probably my favorite standalone sit down and watch Star Wars film. I think most of the other Star Wars movies, they're better within the context of the larger saga, but I think The Last Jedi really holds up as like one standalone film with like one complete, satisfying, self-contained arc. Carol Danvers asks, it's a really good name, you get to direct an Animorph series, who's your ideal cast? So I don't think I'm too hip on like the latest youths who are in film right now. I don't know, it'd probably be like the cast of like It Part 1 and Stranger Things mashed together, and they would, I don't know. Point is, I don't know who would play the kids. All I know is that Peter Weller would play Visser 3. So those are all the questions you guys asked. This was in honor of my reaching $200 a month on my Patreon. Can't thank you guys enough for that. This is so much easier with even just a little bit of money. The quality of everything gets better. The time I have to spend gets better. It's easier to justify spending time on this stuff and more time on this stuff when I actually have a little bit of money coming in. I'm gonna try to get into the next couple of videos I've got planned. I have some props in mind that I'm gonna buy. Not like ContraPoints. Don't get it. I'm not gonna be appearing in costume, unfortunately. I'm not at that level yet, but I got some fun things planned. Doing this only gets more and more fun as time goes on, and so I don't see myself stopping anytime soon. In fact, the bigger the channel gets, the more concerned I get. I mean, ultimately, of course, I do still want to make movies, but like, I keep thinking like, what if a manager finally messages me and wants to represent me, wants to move me out to LA, get me set up, workshop my script, start sending them around town, but on the condition that I stop vlogging. Like, I'd be really conflicted about that. This is a really fun thing for me to do. Anyway, that'd be a happy problem.